Emirates Flight 521 began like any other. The big Boeing 777 pushed back from the gate in Trivandrum, India. The sun was bright, and honestly, the mood was calm. Families were returning from vacation. Business travelers were heading back to work. The flight crew prepared the cabin for the 4-hour journey to Dubai. Passengers settled into their seats. Some watched movies, others read books, or simply dozed off. The flight was completely routine. The purr of the powerful engines was a familiar, comforting sound. For almost everyone on board, this was just another day of travel on one of the world's most modern airlines. The journey across the Arabian Sea was smooth and uneventful. As the aircraft neared its destination, the city of Dubai shimmered below. The iconic skyline with the Burj Khalifa piercing the sky came into view. From the cockpit, the pilots could see the sprawling runways of Dubai International Airport. The weather appeared clear, but looks can be deceiving. The date was August 3, 2016. On the ground, the temperature was a blistering 48 degrees Celsius, or 118 degrees Fahrenheit. This extreme heat created invisible dangers in the air. The pilots were experienced professionals, accustomed to flying into their home base. They began their descent, following the normal procedures for landing. Everything seemed to be going exactly as planned. The unseen danger was something called wind shear. This is when the wind suddenly and violently changes speed or direction. On a hot day like this one, wind shear can be particularly strong near the ground. It can push a plane down or lift it up unexpectedly. It is a pilot's invisible enemy during the critical moments of landing. The flight crew received warnings about wind shear on the approach path. They were aware of the potential challenge. However, knowing about a risk and experiencing its full, sudden force are two very different things. The aircraft was now just minutes from touchdown, descending into this turbulent pocket of air. Inside the cabin, passengers were told to fasten their seatbelts. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, making final checks. The landing gear lowered with a familiar thud. People began to gather their belongings, anticipating a smooth arrival. The routine nature of the flight had given no one any reason to worry. The pilots, however, were becoming increasingly busy. They were now actively fighting the shifting winds. The plane was being tossed around more than usual for a final approach. What was supposed to be a standard landing was quickly turning into a serious challenge for the two men at the controls. Their training was about to be put to the ultimate test. The Boeing 777 was now very close to the runway. The pilots were working hard to keep the plane stable. The wind was pushing them around. The aircraft was coming in a little too high and a little too fast. This is not entirely unusual, and pilots have procedures to correct it. However, the combination of the high temperature and the unpredictable wind shear made their job much harder. The hot air was less dense, meaning the wings generated less lift. The pilots had to manage their speed and altitude with extreme precision. The margin for error was shrinking with every passing second as the concrete runway rushed up to meet them. As the plane crossed the runway threshold, the point where the landing surface begins, the pilots knew they were not in the right position. They were overshooting the normal touchdown zone. They would land too far down the runway. This reduces the amount of space available to stop the massive jet. The commander, who was flying the plane, decided that the landing was not safe. He made a critical decision. He announced go-around, the standard procedure for aborting a landing. This meant they would apply full power, climb back into the sky, and circle around for another attempt. It is a routine maneuver that pilots practice constantly in simulators. The co-pilot acknowledged the command. The pilots began the go-around procedure. They retracted the landing gear, intending to climb away from the airport, but the plane was very low and still descending. The wind shear was still affecting them, pushing the aircraft downwards. At the same time, the throttles, which control engine power, were not advanced to full power as they should have been. This was a moment of profound confusion in the cockpit. The automation systems and the pilot's actions did not align perfectly in these critical seconds. The plane was neither firmly on the ground nor powerfully climbing. The sequence of events happened incredibly fast. The plane was just feet above the hot tarmac. The landing gear was already retracting into the body of the aircraft. The pilots were trying to get the plane to climb, but it did not have enough power or lift to do so. Instead of soaring back into the sky, the big jet continued to sink. The passengers, who were expecting the gentle bump of a landing, felt a sudden and alarming drop. They were about to experience something no one ever wants to experience: a plane hitting the ground without its wheels down. The attempt to go around was now in serious trouble. A key feature of the Boeing 777 played an unfortunate role. The system is designed to prevent pilots from raising the landing gear while the plane is still on the ground. However, the aircraft had bounced briefly on the runway during its initial fleeting touchdown. The sensors registered this as a landing, even though it was only for a split second. Then, as the plane became airborne again for a few moments, the system allowed the pilots to retract the gear. This was a fatal combination. The plane was now sinking back toward the runway, but its wheels were already on their way up. Inside the cabin, the feeling was one of pure terror. Passengers who were looking out the window saw the runway rushing up at them again, but this time, it was different. There was no gentle descent. There was a sudden violent lurch. The sound of the engines was not the roar of a powerful climb, but a strange, indecisive noise. People gripped their armrests. Some began to scream. The flight attendants, trained for emergencies, shouted commands. "Brace! Brace! Brace!" Their voices cut through the confusion, trying to prepare everyone for the inevitable impact. The world outside the window became a terrifying blur of gray concrete. Then came the impact. It was not a landing. It was a crash. The belly of the giant aircraft and its right engine slammed into the runway at over 180 miles per hour. A deafening noise of scraping, grinding metal filled the air. The plane, without its wheels to roll on, began a long, uncontrolled slide down the length of the runway. Sparks flew everywhere as the engine nacelle was torn apart. The aircraft veered violently to the right. Inside, people were thrown forward against their seatbelts. Luggage rained down from the overhead bins, which had burst open from the force of the impact. The slide seemed to last forever. The cabin filled with a thick, acrid smoke. The lights flickered and went out, plunging everyone into a terrifying semi-darkness. The screeching of metal on asphalt was the only sound. Passengers were in a state of shock and disbelief. A routine flight had turned into a nightmare in less than a minute. The plane finally skidded to a halt, resting crookedly on the runway. One of its massive engines had been completely ripped from the wing, but the danger was far from over. The aircraft was heavily damaged, and a fire had already started. With the aircraft stopped, the cabin was a scene of chaos and fear. Smoke was pouring in, making it difficult to see and breathe. The emergency lights cast an eerie glow. The flight attendants immediately sprang into action. Their training took over. They began shouting evacuation commands, directing passengers to the nearest emergency exits. "Unfasten your seatbelts. Leave everything behind. Come this way." Their firm, authoritative voices were a lifeline in the pandemonium. Getting everyone out quickly was a matter of life and death, as the fire on the outside was growing larger and more intense with each passing second. Despite the crew's clear instructions, some passengers panicked. They paused to grab their carry-on luggage from the overhead bins. This is one of the most dangerous things someone can do during an evacuation. Every second wasted retrieving a bag increases the risk for everyone on board. The crew had to physically push people toward the exits, yelling at them to leave their belongings. The inflatable slides deployed from the exit doors, providing a path to safety. But the slide from one of the rear doors was unusable because of the fire and the angle of the aircraft. This forced everyone toward the remaining exits. Outside, airport fire crews were already racing toward the scene. They saw the pillar of black smoke rising from the Boeing 777. They knew they had only minutes to control the blaze before it engulfed the entire fuselage. Inside, the evacuation continued. Passengers slid down the inflatable ramps onto the hot tarmac, running as fast as they could away from the burning jet. They were coughing from the smoke, terrified, but alive. The entire evacuation of all 300 passengers and crew took a remarkably short amount of time, a testament to the crew's professionalism under extreme pressure. Miraculously, every single person on board the aircraft survived the initial crash and evacuated safely. It was a stunning outcome to such a violent event. However, the tragedy was not completely avoided. A heroic airport firefighter lost his life while battling the intense blaze that ultimately consumed the aircraft. The incident involving Emirates Flight 521 became a crucial case study in aviation. It highlighted the hidden dangers of wind shear, the complexities of cockpit automation, and the absolute importance of rapid crew response and passenger cooperation during an emergency evacuation. A routine flight became a near disaster, saved by training, quick thinking, and a measure of luck.